seen today.
Fire is not the first one on the agenda. I'm going to call the meeting to order with everyone's permission. Thank you. It is, what is it today? January 13th, 2021. And the agenda for tonight is to start our slog through the various departments, looking at the budgets from the various departments in town and asking our usual incisive cutting questions. So, I hope everyone's had a chance to open the documents that Rebecca sent the other day. There are a bunch.
Fred, may I make a suggestion?
Yes, Stephen.
Can we pick off some of the easier things like minutes, transfers, correspondence?
Oh,
while
yeah.
we're waiting for.
Yeah, we're going to do that. I just wanted to
Okay.
alert people to the fact that there are a load of documents. And if you haven't had a chance to open them, this would be a good time to do it because there'll be a fair amount of detail to look at. And to your point, Stephen, as per the usual, one of the documents that Rebecca sent out the other day were the minutes from our meeting on December, whatever the heck it was, 16th, I think. And the only error that I'm aware of in those minutes was one that Linda caught, which was that the January meeting schedule was listed as the 13th and the 24th, should have been the 13th and the 27th. 24th, unless you want to meet on a Sunday, is a Sunday. So let's assume that that's been changed. Rebecca has made that amendment. It was a pretty straightforward meeting, as you recall. So I would entertain a motion immediately to accept the minutes if anyone is so inclined.
I will make
So
that.
moved.
Okay, we got a second. I guess we'll do a roll call. Probably makes it easier. I go aye. I'll go in terms of what I see on the screen here. Jeff?
Aye.
Dale. Stephen?
Aye.
Kathy?
Aye.
Linda?
Aye.
Jen?
Aye.
Sarah? You're muted. Sarah?
Aye.
Thank you. And Bob, you're also muted. Bob?
I have a correction.
You do?
I wasn't there.
Oh, that's a good correction.
You
Yeah.
were there in spirit,
Even-
Bob.
Thank you. Minor detail.
But otherwise, aye?
I'll take that out.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. So 3, 4, 5, 6, I have 8 attendees, so I'm going to say minutes were accepted by a vote of 8-0. We do not need this anymore. The agenda for tonight is pretty straightforward. Starting with the police department and segueing to the fire department, we're going to review their FY 2022 budgets as best we can. Less, of course, the capital stuff that we looked at last year. And with that, I'm going to ask Chief Hurley to unmute. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, you know what, excuse me 1 minute here. I've got 2 Zoom sessions running and there's not need for that. So let's get rid of this one. Boom. Where the meeting's away. When I was looking through the documents that you submitted over the last, well, one of them goes back to February of 2020, which was your statement on 1 officer patrol shifts. Before we get into the line items in the budget itself, it seemed to me that a lot of the issues are around staffing, including I guess it's a policy shift in terms of eliminating reserve officer positions and your desire to have more than 1 officer patrol shifts. And you put out a fairly detailed explanation memo explaining a number. This is dated November 16th, and it's titled FY22 Police and Communication Budgets. If you wouldn't mind spending a moment or two just kind of giving the committee an overview of what your chief issues are and concerns, so that we can look at the budget with a little bit more intelligence about what we're reading there. And before you do that, if you wouldn't mind, what does ACO stand for?
Animal
Animal
control.
Control Officer.
Thank you. I went through every acronym I could find, and that didn't come up once. Okay, Animal Control Officer, got it. Yeah, so if you wouldn't mind, just sort of as a preamble to our conversation, just rather than reading through all of the memos that you sent, the ones I'm looking at are the police and communication budget, the phasing out reserve summer officer program, the one officer patrol shift memos. Those were included in our package, but they all seem to be around staffing in one way or another.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I know in each of those memos, when they were sent, there was a CC to finance, and I do apologize if you're seeing it for the second time around. I just figured sometimes as much information as possible up front, can either answer a question or, just kind of give some background as to what we're looking at. The memo dated on the 16th was just an oversight on the FY22 budget and some of the, if you want to call it, issues around it. So the last year, the animal control, I'll back it up a little more. In the reserve line, we increased the line up because we were moving the animal control position from part-time to full-time with a shared agreement with the town of Eastham splitting the cost. So it made more sense to me moving forward in the FY22 budget forward, hence on the side with the reserve program maybe being phased out, to move the animal control into full-time salary and wage. So that's a highlight there. Between FY20, 21, and 22, we've had promotions, we've had a chief's retirement, and you'll probably notice along the lines of salary and wage, it's kind of a yo-yo where we're up, we're down in 21, and then back up again in 22. So just trying to detail in the memo, just trying to explain where some of the shortages were and what we were just trying to correct under salary and wage, along with moving the animal control into that line item A1. Do you want me to stick with the police first and then we go to communication second?
Sure.
And really in the FY20 budget, after taking over and not being involved in the FY20 budget, we were close to a $35,000 shortage in the FY20 budget. And again, just a litany of reasons as to why it was listed, but just kind of historically, just kind of underfunding things, and then either trying to play catch up or just letting the item or the issue, like one officer shifts, just kind of move on to another year. So, for there, that's just kind of a breakdown with that memo, just giving you some highlights of the FY22 budget submitted for police. And obviously in the end of it, you see in the budget sheets, a proposal for body cameras, which has been in the capital plan over the years and kind of always pushed out a few more years out, as there was kind of always some hope the state was going to step in 5 or 6 years ago and come up with some funding, grant funding, to move that program forward. Unfortunately, it's just a very expensive program. It's, to me, a well-needed tool in the field. I think it's that technology that is almost all around the country. The national park rangers have been using them for years in our area. But in Massachusetts right now, last I looked when I was researching it, there are only 9 communities either in test pilots or currently using body cameras. And I hence to bet that a majority of that is because of cost, as you can see in the proposed budget. So those are the highlights. If I can either answer.
Can I ask you a question about that last bit? And this is just kind of an FYI. In your opinion, or to your knowledge, are the body camera programs more to protect the police from unnecessary litigation or whatever, at least to keep a record of what actually happened? Or is it for your own benefit primarily to keep a record of what you did in the field? Is it more defensive, or is it just for record keeping, I guess is the question.
No, I mean, and again, I hate to say I'm from the older generation of policing, so body cameras, I mean, I've done 27 years without body cameras in my career, but again, this is the old adage is that technology starts out west, sweeps through the southeast, and then eventually makes its way up to the Yankee North. Tasers, computers, in-cruiser computers. So body cameras have been around for about 15 years in other parts of the country and in law enforcement. And some of it, I mean, it's an array of issues. You know, some of it is, it tells the story of what's happening. You know, it's on camera, whether it's protecting the community, the town, the police officer, or the people that are involved in the interaction with the police. I mean, it's a story, you know, it's recorded. It's really not up for debate most of the time. So, you know, I think the reason why in Massachusetts, for 2 reasons. Number one, there was always hope of some state funding to at least get this off the ground because of the expense. And number 2, you know, has been the resistance, sometimes from unions and even sometimes from communities to even want to spend the money. So that's kind of why we've pushed it out over the years on the capital plan.
Fred, can I just comment? I think everyone benefits from this. It's not one side or the other. It's an effective tool for community policing, not just for the police force, but also for the public. So
I agree.
I have a question, which is just, we have been an early adopter here for sure. And I'm just questioning the timing with the new administration and, you know, looking at the broad scope of issues and police transparency. If we can delay there, just as you say, you've been waiting for the state, but it may be the federal who might be starting to apply some resources over the next year or 2. I'm wondering, can we continue to, I'm fully in favor of them, but can we continue to be sluggish in our embrace?
I mean, we can. There's 2 parts to the answer that I'll give. The first is that, like anything else in a budget season, even if this is approved and goes through all the proper channels and gets through town meeting, you probably won't see body cameras on officers until next year, because right now throughout the country, we've been told by most vendors, there is now a rush to body cameras, number 1. So, you know, it would be at least a year out. And 2, this is a lease program that we are looking at. So we could always get the program up and running and use state or federal money to offset future years' costs on the devices. So it's, you know, we could wait another year and see how things fall, or we could get the program running, which again, you know, July 1, the budget goes into effect. And I don't think between training and gathering the devices, we would even be operational till 22.
Okay. A question, one more about that. I'm sure other people do as well, have some questions about the personnel, because that's the bulk of the budget. Is there an infrastructure cost to the body camera program? Like, I don't know how long you keep the records or the film or whatever, but typically that would mean storage somewhere. Is that our responsibility to store that? And is that built in? Are there going to be disk drives, or I mean, I don't know what the storage medium is. I'm guessing it's digital. So is there a cost to having servers or something for maintaining that?
Yeah, part of the one vendor that we have looked at, I mean, we've looked at several, vendors. The one that I have zoned in on more, number one, because we already used the vendor for our tasers. We already have an evidence.com program with them, but part of their leasing program, it'll be basically unlimited to their cloud. So yes, I mean, we are responsible for the storage. A majority of the cost is really not the camera. I mean, the camera is a piece of the puzzle, but the operational portion of the camera, meaning the annual service on the device and the storage, and then depending on what policy we come up with here on when the devices are activated. Is it during emergency lights? Are they on 8 hours during the shift? Are they on, so that also comes into play. But in the lease program, we would have unlimited to the cloud and then a program to help us deal with records requests, which even on paper requests that we get is absolutely substantial. And I can't believe if and when video cameras or body cameras ever come, that, we will be getting just as many requests for those, from accident scenes to neighbor disputes to you name it. It's a public document,
Yeah, that's why I asked the question about whether it was a defensive thing in some ways, because once you have them, I'm sure there are going to be people out there who are going to want to see the videos.
Yeah.
More than now, because they don't exist. Does anybody have any questions about the budget from line item A1, the full-time salaries and welfare, to anywhere else in the budget?
No.
That was a general no? Can I, well, if you don't mind, then I have a couple of questions, just things, since that is the bulk of the budget, a few things pop out, and I was just curious. There's,
Well, I have a question.
yeah, go ahead, Stephen.
Is anybody against anything in this budget?
Well, that's a good question. I think the
If
generic.
not, then I move that we approve it.
I'm gonna hold that for a moment. There are
I
a couple-
moved it and it was seconded by
Linda.
Linda.
I have a
Okay, I
question.
still have a question though. So
You can
before
go ahead.
Before I take the vote, I'd like to ask the question. One of the memos, the memo that you wrote in November references monies that were moved relative to the sergeant and lieutenant's position. This is more a question of just getting the numbers exactly right. It says that they were stored from the FY 2021 budget. Line A15 shows 35K for the lieutenant sergeant's positions. The FY 22 shows 0, and the memo references about 45,000 restored from 2019. So I just wanted to make sure I understood those numbers in the context of from 45 in 2019 to 35 in 2021 to 0 in 2022. Just what
So
they
what
mean.
Yep. So what ended up happening was when the budget was put together, there was no person per se, as you can say, that was assigned or promoted to lieutenant's position, nor sergeant. So the 35,000, which was again well underfunded, was put in there just to try to help offset the promotions themselves. So you'll notice in 22 that goes to 0, and the 35,000 is absorbed into the line A1, along with what the true numbers are for the lieutenant and the true number for the new sergeant. So the difference in their salaries after the promotions happened is the difference in all of that. I know it's like 3 different moving parts, but what I was trying to do.
Yeah, and that kind of answers question 1A, because there is about a 10% jump from FY20 to FY22 in line 1A, or A1, and that answers that question as well. So Thanks. And with that, if no one has any other questions, I'm going to entertain taking a vote to, well, here's the thing. The last 2 years, we have not voted on the budgets in line. We've waited until the end of the budget season. If we are changing that, if that's what people are proposing, that we change that and approve the budgets as we review them, I'm open to that suggestion, but that's a different kind of motion. Last year we didn't, and the year before we did not.
So is that a bylaw? Of the
I don't know
FinCom?
if it qualifies as a bylaw. I think
Just
it changes our process. We agreed 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we had.
Right, I understand that, but sometimes we need to look at those things, because I can say with confidence what Chief Hurley's presented is fine. I don't think we'll see any changes. If we did, they'll probably be to the better for us. So it's all fresh in our minds. He did a very good job of presenting it. I'm comfortable with just saying, okay, this is a budget we're going to put on the side because it's well done, and we support it, and then we move on to the next one. So that at the end of the budget season, we're not trying, and I don't know about you, but I'm over 60. So if I'm not focused on some things that I pick up in one day within a week, 3 months down the line, the freshness of it's gone.
I have no problem with dealing with your budgets. I mean, other than, I'm trying to think of what the rationale was for why we had changed it.
Well, let me refresh people's memories about it.
I'm in.
And we can, once again, as a committee, we can revisit this, but 3 years ago, we did what we're doing now. We approved each budget as we went through it. And at the end of the budget season, there was one budget buster, particularly, I believe it was the school budget, that people had a real issue with. And there was an initiative within the committee to say, oh my God, we should go back and look at all the individual budgets and try to squeeze line items out to get the entire budget down by some percentage, because the entire operations budget was well over 2.5%. But there wasn't any latitude to do that because we had already approved the individual budgets earlier. We had voted on them. And having done so, we could not then reopen the conversation and revisit them. So in Janet's last year as chair, she introduced the idea that we would go through the individual departments, but not vote until the end. Noting that, yes, we think the police department budget is fine, but we wouldn't actually vote on it. Last year, we did the same thing.
Was
Now,
it a reaction to, remember that Hild, whatever that acronym was, with that land over by Indian Neck and all of that?
No, it was prior to that. And it just had to do with the fact that when we finally we rarely get the entire budget picture in one bite, because the school very often is late. And that year particularly, it was very high. And so we ended up with an overall budget that busted through 2.5%. And there was a concern within the committee at the time that we find a way to go after individual line items, which we tried to do at town meeting. There were like a legal line item, there were some other things that people tried to address, and it was too late to do that. Whereas if we don't vote on the budgets right in line, we have the option of revisiting them later on. Having said that, there's no reason, I agree with Stephen, there is no reason to think we're going to go back and look at the police department budget a month from now or 2 months from now and go, yeah, I'd like to squeeze $5,000 out of line item B6. But
Right, can I just add something? When Janet was on the committee, she didn't like voting when department heads were in the room. So that's part of where that came from.
well,
And times are changing, 3 years ago when we
is.
started doing that, budgets were different.
It's been I won't call it a policy because I don't think we ever.
No, we don't have any policies. We don't have any bylaws.
That's right. So
there's
it is-
no
it is-
real, when you say the way it's been done, right, it should be fluid and it should change, is what
So-
I'm saying.
Before we change it, though, I would like to get a sense of the committee that you are all comfortable changing it, or conversely, if anyone has a serious problem with changing it, that this is the time to say so. Because I don't want to get halfway through the budget review season and be with.
Well, you should call the vote, then you'll find out where everybody lands, right? Did we call the vote? I don't remember it.
We would
I have
be
a
calling
question.
for vote approving the police department, and I think that's a different thing than what we're talking about. I would entertain first just a sense of the room that we are okay going budget by budget and voting on each one or thumbs up, thumbs down as we review them, unless we have a serious question that can't be resolved in the review.
Okay, so is that a motion on the table? Because if it's a motion on the table, there's already one on there calling for a vote. So why don't you call that first, get rid of it, and then go to what you want to get across?
I don't think we can vote on your motion without resolving the other thing first, Stephen. So I would like you to withdraw that
Okay,
motion.
go ahead, ask everybody.
Does anybody have an issue with going vote by vote? That is, as we.
You mean budget by budget?
Budget by budget, as we review each department, that we vote on it as we review it.
I have no problem with it. I have a question though.
Yeah, what's that, Bob?
Does this budget reflect that there's 2 people in the cruiser or 1? At the risk of sounding ignorant.
I think
You
that's
get
a
the
question.
You get the question?
Yeah, I get the question. Are you you're referencing the memo on 1 officer patrol shifts?
Yes,
Right.
Yeah, no, I mean, at all times, unless it's a summer reserve officer, it is 1 officer in each patrol vehicle. 95% of the time, that's so that we have 2-man coverage out on the road.
Chief, so does your request to change them from summer reserve to another officer, is that budget neutral? Or is it an increased cost to not have the reserve officers and to add another permanent officer?
Well, yeah, that would be coming from within the existing budget that I have.
So it's budget neutral one way or the other, because you still
Yeah.
need the approval of town meeting to add another position.
And if I'm just misunderstanding Bob's question, asking if we put 2 police officers in the same cruiser, I thought that was the question.
Right. My question was, does this budget reflect 1 or 2 officers in the cruiser?
This budget will reflect 2 officers on the road. Maybe.
Okay.
okay.
Right, on the road as opposed to in the same vehicle.
Yes, I'm sorry. When I hear the same car.
So that question aside, I'm not hearing anyone having an issue with going ahead and voting on the police budget tonight. So,
Fred, the issue that I have with that is that we know, I mean, I think after a few years, we kind of know what department heads come in with what type of budgets. And I don't know if voting on some of them and then reserving some, if we have additional questions, is necessarily a fair policy. And again, I don't know, policy, bylaw, whatever you want to call it, but I think if we're going to vote on, if we have questions on one, do we have the ability to then not vote on it that night? Or do we have to take a negative vote? Or, what's the remedy for not having a budget where we're unanimous and cohesive because due to the presentation? I'm just going to toss that out there. So
I think that's a good point. This is not a policy. This is more a practice.
Yeah.
We used to do it differently. We decided 3 years ago to do it this way. We have the option of going back or reverting to the way we did it, or there could be a hybrid. But to your point, it does, if there are budgets that we have issues with, we will have to reserve our opinion on them until we do that every year. There's
Okay.
always like questions that we have that can't be answered the night of, and we ask for clarification or whatever. That is still an option. It was even prior to tonight, because I think the real question here from my perspective is if we think that a particular budget, in this case, the police department's budget, is reasonable, is not going to change in the next few months, at least in the positive end, and fits within what we historically have believed to be the overall context of the town budget, then we can take a flyer and say, sure, we can vote on this individual budget with some confidence that it won't get revisited and that we won't want to revisit it.
Fred, you're overlooking the fact that my motion is still on the table. So could you please call the vote?
All right,
Sorry, I'm late. Could you repeat the motion, please?
would you repeat the motion, please?
I move that we accept the police budget as presented.
Seconded by Linda. All those in favor, I'm going to say aye. Jeff,
Aye.
Stephen,
Aye.
Linda,
Aye.
Jen,
Aye.
Kathy,
Aye.
Ira,
Yes, aye.
Sarah,
Aye.
and Bob.
Aye.
Okay, unanimous. And I
I'd
believe
I'd like to thank the chief for a well-presented budget.
yes, thank you, Chief Hurley.
Oh, thank you. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you, Chief.
And just real quick, the communications 215, a very straightforward budget. The only larger increase is B1 under operating costs. And again, in the memo, I just wanted to detail that moving into a brand new facility with quite a bit of technology that we can get ourselves in trouble with some days. It does come with, after the warranty, some additional costs with extended services and packages. So again, that's kind of fell behind on not properly budgeting that. There's some shortages in the past, so that gets us up to speed. So outside of that, it's a pretty straightforward budget.
Anybody have any questions about 215 communications dispatchers budget?
Nope.
I'll entertain a motion to accept it then.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay, I'll say aye. Jeff,
Aye.
Stephen,
Aye.
Linda,
Aye.
Jen,
Aye.
Kathy,
Aye.
Woody,
Yes, aye.
Sarah,
Is that a dog barking?
Sarah,
You're accusing me of having a dog.
and Bob.
In my house,
Aye.
a dog would never make it here.
Unanimous again.
You're
Hold
a
on.
cat person.
Please no crosstalk while we're voting. It's hard to hear, folks. Well, thank you, Chief Hurley, very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This has been a challenging year for all of us in town, the police department, but the support of the administration, the select board, and the finance committee is very well appreciated by everybody here. We have a great staff, a young staff, and really looking to retain them and the services they provide to the community. So we began vaccinations yesterday, and we're on the road here. So I appreciate the support.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. With that, I'm going to ask Chief Pauly to step up. Let me just close some files here. Welcome, Chief Pauly.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everyone else on the Finance Committee. Hope you're well and healthy.
So far.
Over.
Aye.
So again, however you prefer to go through this, again, if you look at the budget's broken down into personnel, the A line items, and then B as operating expenses. Certainly the largest increases in the A1 salary full-time, and that reflects the two new positions that were approved at the September 2020 annual town meeting. So those salaries for those two positions are in there. And then the remaining is of the increase is basically all contractual through the three contracts, bargaining agreements that we have between the Permanent Firefighters Association, Welfare Employees Association, and of course, my contract with the town. So that reflects the increase there in A1. If you go down to, I'm sorry, A7 and A8, you'll see that A8 has been zeroed out for 2022. But in A7, we're at 72,031. What that did was under A8, under the old contract with the call firefighters, they would get paid a stipend to go to on every ambulance call. It was a stipend that ranged somewhere between $75 and $110 if they took the trip to the hospital. But throughout my whole time here, I wanted to eliminate that stipend and just make it reflective of hourly. Because every time we've tried to get a payroll vendor in here to really upgrade our internal payroll system, they couldn't work through the stipend versus the hourly, and it became highly problematic. So basically, we negotiated to do away with the stipend, but to change it to an hourly rate if a call firefighter EMT goes to the hospital with a transport. So basically, that is almost it's a little less money this way, only because we average it out based upon call volume for the previous few years. So that's what that is reflective of.
So Chief, could I ask you a question on the stipend? How much, the stipend was a flat rate, right?
That's correct.
So it's moving up to an hourly rate?
Yes, but essentially, Steve, if you look at the stipend as compared to the hourly rate, it almost is exactly the same. It's just how we're paying them for their time versus
Right.
versus the hourly. And again, we really need to, well, there's a couple issues that really drive this. One is we need to provide how we perform payroll is archaic. And it's all done on spreadsheets and through the process that our administrative assistant, Teresa's been here for 28 years. She has it, in the back of her head. She's wonderful. And she's got it down. She knows all the language and the contracts. On the occasion that she's out and I have to do the payroll, I can guarantee you it's wrong. And I apologize in advance to all my people. And they're all very
Okay, well, that's like
accepting
a
of it.
I'm sorry,
Me
Chief, that's
too.
kind of a technical issue. Right now, how much is the stipend?
There is no stipend anymore. It's all based upon the hourly.
Okay, what was the stipend amount?
It ranged between $75 and $110 per trip to the hospital.
Per trip, okay.
Yeah.
And then on the hourly rate, you must have like a minimum hour for a run, right?
That's correct. Yes.
How many, what is that?
So basically, it reflects the true run, Steve, which is about 3 hours. So
Okay, yeah,
3
that's
hours.
it. That's all I needed. Thank you.
You're
Got it.
welcome. You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Chief Pauly, the number that obviously, well, there are two numbers that always jump out of the fire department's budget. One is overtime, which is the lesser, and the other one is A1. The budget in 2020 was $400,000 less than the FY22 budget. I understand that the two firefighters paid for by the SAFER grant are now included in A1, is that right?
That is correct.
That doesn't account for the whole 400,000 though, I'm guessing.
It doesn't, but if you look at the bottom, down the bottom of the notes, I disagreed with this when the previous town administrator deducted out $118,500, which was the SAFER reimbursement. I vehemently disagreed at the time because essentially that's an income and that would just go into the general fund and should not have been dropped off the fire department budget. It's like, for lack of a better term, when we get income from permits and fees or even ambulance receipts, which I don't want to go into that tonight in any detail, but that is an income that should have gone into the general fund and not have been taken off the bottom line of the department budget. And Dan and I talked about this and he insisted and I had no relief based upon that. So that also is part of that $118,000 is also part of, that difference that makes it look really larger than it is, if that
Okay.
makes sense.
So we got some relief that we didn't get in the following year. Is that the idea?
I'm not sure I understand your question, Fred.
Well, that the 118,000 allayed the costs that would have accrued to the
Well,
town.
Actually, we haven't even seen that money yet because of combination of COVID, problems at the federal level, problems with their FEMA Go system, which has been a nightmare. So we haven't even seen that money yet, that reimbursement. But again, when we do see it, it will come into just the general fund as an income.
Okay. So
Won't come into the fire department, won't come into the fire department budget is what I'm saying.
let me ask the question a different way, because I'm looking at your additional budget request for FY 2022 of 168,000.
Yes,
But you have a cost benefit analysis that talks about needing more personnel in the coming years in order to have 4 groups of at least 4 full-time people per shift.
yes.
So if you could break down that $400,000 difference in terms of what do we have for that 400,000? Is it the 2 firefighters? Is it 2 firefighters plus salary increases? Is it 2 firefighters plus salary increases plus something else? What does that number actually represent?
Well, again, the number represents 167,000. I'm sorry, almost 200,000 represents just the 2 firefighters that were approved at last September's town meeting, and the contractual increases through the bargaining agreements. And then if you take the 118,000 that shouldn't have been deducted out, and then there was another 48,000 that was deducted out based upon, I don't want to use the term fuzzy math, but again, these were 2 issues that I vehemently disagreed with the town administrator at the time, because he took it off the bottom line of the salaries and wages, basically. And to me, it just didn't make sense. So I don't know if that answers your question, Fred, but that's the best way I can explain it, because I don't understand it, what his thinking was at the time anyway.
So the way I am understanding it, I guess, is that part of the cost is actual salaries, benefits, whatever, for the firefighters, and part of it is accounting changes over what we did before, and the monies are going back into your budget that should have not, from your opinion, have been eliminated from, or charged elsewhere. Is that?
I guess that's the best way of describing it, yes.
So I don't want to like beat this horse until it's meat, because I don't know that anybody's a fan of horse meat. Would it be fair to ask Maria or Heather? I don't know how embedded you are in this yet, Heather. Are these changes that you are, quote, accounting for going forward? Because Chief Pauly and I, or we have had this conversation in the context of this annual thing as well, of what is the right number for the fire department? What is the right staffing? What would it cost Wellfleet to do that, so that we don't lose people year over year, that we pay them the appropriate amount and all? And as I noted, your memo says we will need more people in the coming year in addition to this. So this to me is a way station on the way to what your real budget will be 2 years from now, say.
If I could, before Maria, because I just, again, not to interrupt, but I think maybe this will help. So in the upcoming town meeting, we're going to ask for 2 more people, as you saw there. I would expect that would go to an override, as we've always done. After that, we will need 2 more full-time positions in the following budget. And based upon, again, the retirements and basically elimination of the call force budget, because there's no one coming in the door, as I've said for the last 5 years, we'll be able to cover, in my estimation, at least 1.5 of those positions in existing funds at that point. So this is like the last big hurdle coming up at this upcoming town meeting, to ask for 2 more people on an override. And then hopefully be able to take 2 out of existing budgets by shifting money from call firefighter salaries and wages to full-time. And we will have the staffing at the minimum level that it should be, that I feel comfortable with, and reflects what we need at this point in time, if that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And understand, I'm just speaking for myself at the moment.
Sure,
This
sure.
this is not a criticism. This is just, I think we all respect the work that you do, and it's really the question of what will it really cost for you to have a department that you feel is stable, effective, and capable of doing the job it needs to do without you're asking people to do double shifts and the stuff that you had to do in past years.
Well,
So,
sure. Please, Fred, it's not taken as a criticism at all. I appreciate the dialogue, because I think the more information I can give the select board, the townspeople, the FinCom, it just provides for a better outcome. So there's no, I don't take it as criticism at all. And the select board and the administration in your committee, the FinCom, has been extremely helpful to the fire department, and very, very receptive to my requests. So that's very much appreciated. You guys have supported us as a committee in the time I've been here. I guess, again, where I'm going is we're almost to the, almost can see the light at the end of the tunnel, with 2 more positions on an override, and then the final 2 out of existing funds in the 23 budget. So, we've worked hard over the last 5 years to beef up staffing where we need to be. And I'm finally feeling a little optimistic that we're going to get there.
So if I may, what should be reflected in this number is what it's going to cost. This number is what it costs for those positions. This is an expenditure budget. This isn't showing revenue or offset. So if what we're saying is 1.253 million, and that's what it costs, that's what the number should be. So whichever positions are looking to be funded by this, there's a spreadsheet of numbers behind this that shows what the salaries are, and whatever else goes into that line item, that's what that number should be. So if you're proposing new positions, or you're adding the positions that were approved in the meeting that we just had, that's what budgetarily what should be in this number.
Right, so this budget,
the previous administration had done with the 118, we need to reflect the actual costs, and that's what this is. So, Heather can get more granular absolutely than I can, but this isn't a revenue budget, this is an expenditure budget, and this needs to reflect the expenditure and the cost of those positions.
and I think to that point, every year we've talked with Chief Pauly, we ask just that question, is what's the real cost? So that on the basis that this does roll up to an entire budget at some point, but it also reflects an ongoing challenge for Wellfleet across a number of departments to keep a staff that's adequate to the needs, including the season.
Yeah, if you don't put what the actual cost is in here, boy, you end up going crazy trying to track where the money came from. We're doing a little bit of that right now, right? So, this needs to be true cost. Like all these numbers, if there's more than, one calculation here, there's a spreadsheet behind it, that shows where that money.
And I think those was distributed to us, the FY22 budget worksheet for salaries and wages. It says 261 days, so I guess that was into some point in there. But we have that in our package. And does anybody have any? Yeah, Jeff.
Chief Pauly, it's just, I guess what, we're looking is to not be in the position where we're losing people, where there's a lot of the turnover. And I think that's what you're trying to address here, correct?
Well, you're correct, Jeff, but we went about 1.5 years without any significant turnover. About 2.5 years ago. Unfortunately, we've lost 2 again to other departments for more money, and we've had 1 retirement. This is going to be a continuous struggle, and only because, again, the outer Cape towns tend to pay a little less on police and fire and public safety, public works. and we still have the highest housing costs and living costs in the Cape. Two of my people left. They had been both here for 2 years, and they walked into the door at 2 different fire departments and took a $10,000 pay increase right off the bat. You know, and I can't blame them. You know, they didn't want to leave, but it just became they're both young individuals and both got married, and they're looking at starting families, and they needed the extra money. And it really hurt to see him go, but that's, Jeff, you're absolutely correct.
So could I comment on that, Fred? Just,
Yes, please.
and this is going to be way off the topic, but with the new community housing project that's due to be built in this town, is there any way that we can try to find out if any affordable housing, I'm not saying all of it, but that a percentage of it goes to men and women who serve to protect us here in town, whether it's the police department or the fire department, because that's a big challenge. Chief Pauly's right. You can't fault these people for coming here, but then getting, you know, an offer better down the road, and because we can't afford to offer the housing that they need to stay here. I know it's way off topic, but it just popped in my
Well,
head.
if it's the case that it's workforce income level housing, and these folks fit into that, salary level, then certainly that would be the case. But if you're talking about whether you give priority to someone that works for police and fire, that's a better question for the folks that are closer to that development and what philosophically that policy looks like.
The Community Housing Task Force. But I do have to ask this question because I've never seen this kind of weird stuff on a spreadsheet. The 118,500 is actually, you're just adjusting for a mistake made in 2020, right?
What we're adjusting for, Steve, is that, again, my position that 118,500 never should have been a debit off the department budget.
Right.
It should have just been counted as income into the general fund. And that was just, again, the previous town administrator, that's the way he looked at it. And I disagreed with it, but he was the builder of the budget at the end of the day.
But see, to me, an income figure, I see why it's a negative, but why is it on it? Well, it doesn't matter. That's the past. Now we have a new town administrator. Just want to remind everybody.
We do.
Thank
And a
you.
new accountant.
And a new
accountant.
Who is
Trying to figure out this one instead of
But
being.
also
Oh, sure,
muted.
well.
We have a new accountant who is muted at the moment, so can't even hear her laughing.
Can we
It's makes
move
No
on?
one can hear you laugh.
Are we ready for a vote on this?
I have one other question for the chief, and then yes. Have you seen any increase or change in your workload as a consequence of the extra people staying in town this winter from presumably because of COVID? Are you getting more calls to go to the hospital, more fires, more anything?
That's an interesting question. I appreciate it, Fred. Our EMS calls are down about 10%. I think that's going to, because basically when we talk to people, they're reluctant to go to the hospital. They're concerned about the COVID situation. They want to try to wait it out at home as long as they can. And that I'm hearing from not only my peers on Cape Cod, but all over the country. But on the flip side, we're seeing a little bit more increase because yes, the residences that were seasonal or close to the winter, I've got 4 of them around me now around in my neighborhood that I see that have never had winter activity. So it's almost like it's balancing out. But I do believe that, as Chief Hurley said, with the vaccines coming out, I expect that we're going to have a busy spring and a busy summertime again, because I think folks are just COVID exhausted. And we've done such a great job on the outer Cape of at least minimizing the exposure to the greatest extent possible that we can as a community and communities. I think that we're going to see, if we have good weather, the restaurants are going to want to open up as soon as they can, which I understand, the motels. So, I just have this sense that it won't be a normal year, but it'll be a lot more normal than last year, is my sense.
I think you're probably right. Maria, did you want to say something? You greened up there for a second.
Nope, hopefully not too greened up. No, we spent time with both chiefs going over the budget. There's no fluff here. There's no fluff in either one of these.
Yeah, I think the
We're
question.
reflecting actual costs, so.
Fred, can I
Without-
ask could I just enter just a little observation here, which like on the fire department budget format, which is something I'm familiar with, he has like the 2020 budget and then 2020 actual column. A lot of times, if you want to look for fluff in departments, if you look back over a 2-year historical, that gives you a better, more accurate. I mean, there's no fluff here on either of these budgets. I'm just saying in terms of budget format, it would be nice if it could be similar to the fire department's budget in that you've got the budget, 2020 budget, and then 2020 actual.
We're getting
But
there.
I'm the only
That
one,
is-
that's okay, I don't care.
Yeah, no, we're getting there. That's really, in Heather's wheelhouse, and, sort of the forensic work that they've been doing to go back and actually make sure that the numbers that are reflected in the actuals align with the line items to which they're supposed to be accounted for. And, it's been a manual exercise. I don't know if you want to chime in on that, Heather, but, that's.
I will echo what Maria said. I'll be the first one to apologize that you are receiving what I would consider to be an incomplete document in my world. I know Maria and I have both struggled because, that actual column, what was being produced out of the system was just frankly not accurate. But we are almost there, thank goodness. I mean, I cannot take all the credit. If I didn't have the assistance of Lisa Souve, there is no way on God's green earth that we would be this far, this fast. So please expect to see a much more complete document generated directly out of the system within at least the next several weeks. I actually just gave a draft today to Maria to show her our progress about how we have gotten there. But you are absolutely right. It's a little bit like flying blind when you don't have those actual numbers. And again, please accept my apologies, but we are well on our way there.
Yeah, that's sort of where we started with, when I started, I couldn't get a budget status report. So, we're closer and closer to having what I consider a live budget. But it's literally a manual exercise. We still have Lisa Souve on, who is, literally going through each expenditure over the last year, 2 years or more, more than 1 year, just to make sure that the numbers that the departments have, you're always going to, so, 1/12, 8.5%, you're always going to have some seasonal fluctuation, things in a line item that you spend more on at one time of year than the other. You should be about the 50% mark right now because you just crossed over halfway into the fiscal year. But we're getting closer to being able to produce status reports and making sure that you're blessed for having individuals in the police department and the fire department that are minding their own budget in a detailed way. And, it gives us the opportunity to compare what they thought the line items things were coming out of were with what was actually in the VADAR system, the way it was set up or not set up. So we Heather and all of the folks in town hall have been diligently working transaction by transaction to make sure that, we're going to have a budget that I can sleep at night knowing what's in there. So,
Well, yeah, thank you. And as you know, we certainly expressed our concerns in the October to December timeframe about the absence of a Heather, for one thing, and where the accounting controls were and how accurate the data was, because we became apprised around that time frame that the the numbers were not as accurate as we might have been led to think they were. And to Stephen's point, in years past, we would get an entire operations or an entire budget book that would have the projected and the actuals for the previous 3 years. We've always gone on faith that those numbers are pretty close to true without knowing that that's the case. They are the numbers that are presented. So
And I don't know if over the last couple of years they were true.
and nor can we know. You see what you're given, and
Yeah.
you ask your questions based on that.
Well, I just want to say that this budget's presented tonight have been an improvement. I mean,
Yeah.
you're doing a fine job. It's not, I mean, you could put that column in there if you want or not. I mean, I
Yeah.
just pointed it out because it's some, but hey,
That's a good
Yeah.
point, Steve.
In its more final form, you'll also see a percent change.
So
you read my mind.
That's what I'm used to. So you'll see what the percent changes up and down from, budget bottom lines and line items.
So returning to Chief Pauly for the moment, and I don't want to boil the ocean on this. The only reason this even came up was because in your memo, you said that when you get the extra members to the department that you've requested for this year and FY23, that will get you to the minimum requirement that you were looking for. And so I think at some point in the future, it doesn't have to be tonight for sure, it would be an interesting and useful conversation to kind of understand what the minimum means in the context of if the town returns to its seasonality bell curve where people don't hang out here in the winter and really the load is the influx of tourism and then they go away, as opposed to this year where they're not going away so much. If we go back to that model of a town, does that change your projections, or would your projections actually go up if you thought people were going to be around more often? If this is now the beginning of a new normal for the town and you might need more people, that's a question for the future, but just something we ought to all think about at some point, because I'm guessing that most of your projections are based on historical models of what you've needed, not necessarily what happens if COVID gets worse, for example. So
Remote working suggests that we're not going back to the old norm, whatever that is. I'd like to just close. I'd like to see us just vote on this. I think Chief Pauly.
I would be happy to entertain a motion.
I'll move.
Second, Stephen?
Second,
There you go.
yes, whatever.
All right, so this is to recommend the fire department budget, yes? Okay, I'm gonna say aye. Jeff?
Aye.
Stephen?
Aye.
Linda?
Aye.
Jen? Ira?
Yes.
Kathy?
Aye.
Sarah?
Aye.
And Bob?
Aye.
Okay, if I'm counting right, then it's 9-0.
If I may, thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I'm just going to take a second here. I'll be going into my 8th year as fire chief next month in this town. And we've made a lot of progress. It's certainly through the select board, the FinCom, the town administration, and the taxpayers. And I know my department appreciates it. I see it every day. I do see smiling faces. I do see people that enjoy working for the town of Wellfleet and serving the town. And I appreciate your support. And as Chief Hurley said, as of tomorrow about noontime, we'll have the entire department have been vaccinated for their first vaccines of the COVID-19. We're waiting on 3 more people.
Woo-hoo.
Excellent.
Moderna, the Moderna one?
And I'm proud to report that is 100% buy-in from all of the fire department personnel. Every
That's good.
single individual is bought into the vaccine.
Is it the Moderna one that you're using?
Yes, it is, Jeff.
Great.
Who's administering it for you?
That is, it's being done basically through the Barnstable County, and we are the Outer Cape is participating in the clinic, which is a drive-through clinic in the town of Orleans. So
Awesome, good to know.
So that's I'd love to be a volunteer fireman for a day. Can I come in and get my shot? And
You
then-
can do what we call a ride along, but you won't get your shots.
Oh, man, well, like that pretty much defeats the purpose right there. Well, that's it for tonight in terms of reviewing budgets, and thank you to Chief Hurley and Chief Bawley for putting together two budgets we could recommend, which is, almost unheard of. Liaison reports. I have a very brief one on the school, but it's not actually a report. Anybody have anything to report in their individual areas that you want to share?
No, I don't, but I do have a liaison report of question of you. Where is the high school project?
Well,
Where's-
I can give you some anecdotal word of mouth. I spoke to Tom Conrad yesterday,
Right,
and my understanding is, and this is based on memory at the moment, there is going to be a vote across the region on March 30th, as I understand it. It will not be individual town meeting votes. An up or down vote that will be, if over 50% vote yes, that the project will go forward as structured. There have been some concerns, as you know, about the energy generation. Tick Elkin particularly has been pushing for an energy neutral or renewable energy solution. They've looked at a number of solutions. They're going to try to incorporate some of those concepts, but there are things they can't do. The cost, as I understand it, they've done a spec on what it would cost if the project does not go forward. Just to bring the building up to code would be about $90 million. So it's almost a wash. The amount that would be asked of the four towns to do the renovation versus the cost of doing an upgrade on the existing structure is in the 90-some million dollar range. And the difference being that the MSBA will contribute the 30-some million if we go ahead, if the four towns, the region goes ahead and does the new construction.
so what's the price tag on the new construction?
It's about 130 million. I don't remember the exact.
About, they don't have a final,
Oh, yeah, they do. And it's not on the top of my head.
130?
Yeah, it's about that. It was
Okay,
about,
so
My
the
rec-
angle is why spend $90 million on upgrading something that needs to be replaced? Why not spend 130,000 or 130 million? Is
Well,
that
yeah,
it?
36 million would come from the state.
It's all because of the way the state is reimbursing. That's what it all comes down to on this. There's a
Well, I
time limit.
understand where it all comes down to, but how about an opportunity to rethink how we're spending money on education? Nobody's looking at things like, for instance, Cape Cod Tech. They have AP classes. They have to adhere to the same testing standards as Nauset High School. Anybody who goes to Nauset High School can go to either the Tech, the charter school, or Monomoy High School. So how come nobody's talking about perhaps taking a look at this building and how much money is being spent on it or is going to be spent on it? And does it really make sense to do that with a dwindling youthful population 10 years down the line? Is there a real need here? Whereas right now, there are perfect alternatives.
well, they're not alternatives to the high school. They're alternatives to some of the students. But the way I spoke to Tom over the course of a couple of years as the liaison in the run up to this, and the region in conjunction with the MSBA had to address a lot of those questions. What is the likely student population for the regional high school as opposed to any other schools over 30 years? What kinds of alternative education options are there if the school population dwindled? And they went through a vetting process on that subject. And that doesn't address the overall question of whether there will be fewer student age people on the Cape in 30 years or not. There probably will be. There is a migration away from the Cape of people who have young children. But that process has been done. The MSBA was satisfied that those questions were answered. I know there are other concerns.
All
about-
right, okay, Fred, they weren't answered. I'm probably in the minute minority on this one. I'm just expressing my point of view as a finance committee member and as a resident who wants to plan for the future. I mean, we've got all these incentives to do affordable housing. Part of the way you offer that is by keeping taxes down. You're going to have a large note on this building, and it's going to be basic. What the projections was like, what, 1,900 students, 854
No, it's
or
closer-
something like that? Or
It's closer to 1,000.
1,000, yeah.
Can
We
I,
move on. I mean, there's gonna be all
Yeah,
of,
exactly. You can.
Yeah,
move on.
and
Just thank
all,
you.
all I'm trying to say, per the original question, is there will be a vote on March 30th. It's an up or down vote. It will not come in all likelihood in any form to town meeting this year as an article. So Wellfleet will not be voting on it at town meeting, but as a voter, you will have the opportunity to vote yes or no
Right.
on 30th. And if you
I think-
believe, as some people do, that there are better alternatives to doing it, you'll have the opportunity to express yourself on March 30th. That is, as I understand it, is the current status of the project.
hey, Fred,
It does need to come on
No,
the,
All right, yep.
go ahead, Maria, I'm sorry.
sorry, Kathy, it does, will end up on the January 26th agenda for the select board because they have to actually approve the vote going
Yeah.
forward. It's, I guess, you know,
You mean
they're work-
30th vote? Yeah, yeah, I understand there's some operational issues about getting that vote set up, which I guess is what you're referring to.
right,
Fred, do you know
in-
what the bond
No,
term is?
Kathy, I'm sorry,
I'm
Kathy?
sorry. Do you know what the bond term, what the length of the bond is? Do we have a number, do we have an outline of the structure of that lending?
I think they said it was a 30-year note or 20, 25.
I thought it was 25.
Okay.
It
25.
that hasn't been determined yet. So, you know, the last communication that I saw today was from Chris Isley, am I saying his name right? That
Mhm.
that the actual financing piece of it was likely going to be determined after the vote. So there's, you know, discussion of 25-year, 30-year fixed or, you know, whatever the options are. Right now, the interest rates are going to be so low, it almost.
That's
makes-
true. Yep. Good time to borrow.
Well, just from
It
a,
almost
just from
makes
a
sense to
struc-
do it shorter, so.
just from a structure standpoint, I think at one point I heard 40 years and, you know, it's never a good idea to have a term on a note that is going to outlive the collateral. And I don't, but you know, if we're still paying a school off in 40 years, then the structure of the loan, because you can fit that in the back end for what seems to be affordable, but you have to consider how long we're going to pay for this for. Because again, this school might be obsolete the way technology and the way the environment is changing and the school days are changing. This school might be obsolete in 20 years.
That's part of the reason why the town managers are certainly, you know, encouraging them to look at a shorter term, especially considering the interest rates being as low as they are.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah, bear in mind too that the, well, two things. The MSBA will not extend the deadline anymore. So if this vote goes down, the option of getting money from the state goes away, probably forever.
I don't think that's
And-
true, though.
What?
I don't believe that is a truism.
Well, I got it from the superintendent, so
Yeah, that's just something they hang out there to make you fraidy scared. So you'll
As you
vote
can-
on it.
if that's what you believe.
That's what that
fine.
is, Fred.
But the MSBA has already granted them 2 extensions, and I'm going to take it on faith that, in my experience with the superintendent, he's telling me the truth as he understands it. If the MSBA has a different truth.
His interpretation of it. Was he also the one who told you that some high school students can't take advantage of going to Cape Cod Tech?
No, he never told me that.
No, okay, because you mentioned, you said not all students out here could take advantage of going.
No, what I said
Tech.
was you couldn't get rid of the high school and have all the students dispersed into other school systems.
Why
There-
not?
There is still, well, I don't know, because I
Now
imagine.
people are doing classes by virtual,
At
you know, by
award-winning
staying
high
at home. So my point is nobody's having the dialogue. Nobody's looking at alternatives to reduce costs dramatically in the school system here. Because everybody wants to back away from it. So I guess I'm the only one, but I wanted to bring it up.
No, I
Okay.
agree. Stephen, I agree. I have concerns about costs and changing education. And I think if you guys recall pre-COVID, when the school budget was up and they were talking about the capital, and the superintendent, I'll go back to it, asked us to think of what the school system in 30 years is going to look like. I think I said it's not going to look like what you're proposing. And I think there's a lot of serious concerns about need and want and ability to finance it and continue to have people come here and be able to afford to live here. So, it's strictly a financial question.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation to have about the future of society and the future of society on Cape Cod, which we should have over a beer when COVID is over.
Well, now I'm
because
sorry I brought it up.
it's a tough one to get around. No, don't be sorry. It's a good conversation. It's just not one that we can do anything about. Bottom line is there'll be a vote on March 30th. Vote yes, vote no, don't vote. These are the options. That's it for my liaison report. Does anybody have anything else?
Fred, I have a quick question. When you talked to Superintendent Conrad, did he talk at all about how lumber prices might affect their estimates?
Nope.
Because that would be interesting to look at, because the lumber prices are through the ceiling. So I would have to believe that would affect their plans.
It could, and I did not do a deep dive on that. This was my purpose in calling Tom was just to get a quick update on where things stood, and not to like revisit the plans, the construction, and whatnot. That really, it's above my pay grade too, to be honest. I mean,
because it's a commercial building. Because it's a commercial building, the framing is going to be steel.
yeah.
So what would normally be wood framing.
Way to go, Maria.
Wood framing in a residential building would have to be steel framing to meet the code in a commercial building. If
Don't
that
forget
helps.
the sprinklers.
Information, yep.
Yeah,
I'm going to move on to transfers, which we have none of, correspondence, which we have none of.
Actually,
And
you do. I have one thing to say.
Yes.
Hi. So you do have a little bit of correspondence. Bill Dugan again emailed the FinCom and the Select Board. He's the guy that is all about the school choice and not having school choice. I
Yes.
just got an updated letter. That's why you don't have it. I will forward it to you tonight when we're done, just so you can read it. Again, you've talked about it before. I don't know that the FinCom has any say whatsoever in school choice, but he wanted you to have it. So I wanted you to know that it is there, and I will forward it to all of you.
All right, thank you. And we can enter it as correspondence at our next meeting if that's appropriate. We've visited this issue a number of times already. It's my position that, to your point, we do not have anything to say about school choice that affects our role here in town. So that's where I would leave it. Under new business, Heather Michaud is joining us for the very first time, our new town accountant. We had a chance to talk today. I'd like to introduce her if she unmutes.
Good
Hi,
evening,
Heather.
everyone.
And if you wouldn't mind, just give us a couple of minutes on what you're currently working on, and that we talked about your attending our meetings on a regular basis to kind of do a state of town finance update as we meet. And we're going to be meeting twice a month for the next couple of months. So I wouldn't necessarily ask you to do that, but once a month seems like a lot. If you would just like to introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Of course, thank you for the invite tonight. And, I appreciate coming to Finance Committee meetings. They were a big part of my prior life. So, this is actually enjoyable for some of us in the world. And I'm really not kidding. So, essentially what I've been working on, Maria did a wonderful job, sort of glazing over what we're dealing with. But, it's a system issue in a lot of respects. It's not something that necessarily has to do with The numbers, though, as you know, we've struggled a little bit to define what those numbers should be, and the actual, I'm just going to use a large term, buckets where they should be, the accounts where they should be. And, you know, Maria spoke to that. So, you know, that's really been the heavy lift, is just getting that system up and running to the capacity that it should be functioning, and to then, of course, generate monthly financials that I assumed, and forgive me, I was foolish. I assumed that you were receiving those type of financials, and the select board and anything else that the town administrator would request. So clearly that would be my goal, as long as you're interested in receiving that type of information, would just be simply to design a monthly financial report that would give you, you know, an overview and help you make your decisions in a more informed manner, if that makes sense. I could be speaking gibberish, but that would be my goal, as just a support of, you know, the town administrator and this committee and the select board.
Silence.
Well, that's very ambitious of you.
Thank you.
Love that.
And uplifting as well. Could you speak for a moment to like how you are or not coordinating with Lisa Souvet? As I understand it, she is trying to reconcile the last 3 years and get the books accurate. And you are projecting forward to some degree, but there's obviously a crossover.
Right, very accurately put. I must say that administration did me an enormous favor by locating Lisa. She is a wealth of knowledge. She even knew the system. I was not familiar with the system, though I am a database person. So her mission initially, and it continues to be, is really to reconcile that historical data that we keep talking about. We're really looking to close 1920 as the audit is now upon us. We have an assignment and an expanded scope. They will be here the week of February 8th. So that is the mission, is to make sure that those beginning balances that rolled from your old system called BMSI into the new system VADAR are accurate, and then the cash clearly was accurate. And then from there, it would be expenditures, revenues, and then cash as well through 1920. And then, of course, rolling into 2021, I'm backing into it. So we're sort of meeting in the middle. I'm doing current journal entries and adjustments in the accounting. And then, of course, I'm projecting moving forward on the budgetary basis, with the goal of eventually getting all of the encumbrances in current real time. And then, you know, a host of other, I would think, essential reporting functions from an accounting and forecasting standpoint.
So the system that we have now, the new system is VADAR?
It is.
Okay, is it something you find user friendly, or is it? I mean, we did have an archaic piece of equipment or whatever you call it for back then, and year after year when we got audited, the thing that used to come up was the revenue generating forecasting piece of the old system wasn't being used, and it could be helpful during the budget process. And I think the understanding or the promise was, when we switched from the old one to the new one, was that one of the better things of the new one is that, yes, there's going to be a revenue projection for departments. Not that we don't need it right now. I'm just mentioning to you what's happened in the past. So hopefully going forward with this new system as part of the budget process, we'll be able to have some revenue projections.
You are correct. This system does have a split module, in that as I mentioned before, I just literally gave Maria a draft today utilizing the expenditure budgeting module. There is a secondary module to that does capture revenues as well, that I will build out. In my prior systems, I am used to doing that, so I can see the value of having that information, especially you know, from a budgeting standpoint as well as real time. So it does have both functionalities.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
If I may, Fred, you know, there's some, you know, basic best management practices that Heather and I are both used to, that you know, everybody everybody has been sort of operating organically and keeping track of things in the best way they know how. But
It's a
there's
very
certain-
diplomatic way to put it.
Well, because everybody's been doing a great job of taking care of themselves, because they've had to. But there's some basic things that we're going to standardize across the town. So how someone applies for leave, how leave is tracked, that your leave is on your pay stub, that your comp time gets approved by your supervisor, that if you get a purchase order that is filed, preceded by a requisition, and that Heather's office signs off that the money is in the bank and coming out of the right account. There's just, basic process stuff that Wellfleet doesn't have. And, we got to get the accounting piece done, in parallel to this budget process. But at the same time, I'm looking at bills that I want to see that a department head or someone designated by a department head has signed off to say they've looked at this bill and this is what they expected that it would be. We're on a day-to-day basis getting bills from departments and saying, okay, where's the contract that's connected with this? I don't have a list of contracts that the town has and what their expiration dates is, whether they have escalators, whether they're based on CPI, everybody's been doing a really great job of operating organically, but there are a number of things that are just sort of normal practices that you'll see over the course of the next 4 to 6 months, standardized townwide. Everybody's going to be using the same payroll sheets. Right now, everybody's doing like a check the box kind of paperwork system to say how many hours they worked every day. That's completely unnecessary. The only thing that they really need to do is say that they're off and what leave they're charged to. We're manually entering data several times in some instances that would make you just want to throw papers in the air. If the possibilities were of doing, working smarter on some of this stuff, you would just run screaming. So we're going to get there. When we have this conversation, next year's budget is going to be a whole different level of expectations.
That's great. So let me ask a question of you and Heather, and it doesn't need to be answered now, okay? Since we will be seeing you again and again and again. When I spoke to Heather today, I mentioned that we are an advisory board, which is somewhat at odds with her expectation for FinComs in other towns she's worked in, where the FinCom owns the budget. Clearly, we do not. However, being an advisory board is an open field to some degree. What advice about what? How broadly, what's our role is a question that we address over and over and over again. We dipped our toe a couple of years ago into doing a little more strategic, looking forward at big ticket items that are coming down the pike. Anecdotally, I've heard from the select board at times and other areas, TA, that the FinCom's advice is solicited or encouraged, but without specifics, without saying at what stage in the budget development process or the budget review process or the forecasting process we could enter into a conversation where we can cull from our experience something that would be useful to you or to the select board and so on. So that's an open-ended question right now, and one I would like us to think about as well as you, so we can kind of meet somewhere in the middle and say, look, if we can be an advisory board in a way that we are not currently, that is useful without asking people to do a deep dive into areas that we don't belong. As Woody put it a few years ago, we don't make operations or we don't make policy decisions. That's true, we don't. But we can advise on where money should go or where priorities ought to be, maybe. So if you guys would think about that, it would be so helpful.
Yeah, no, and we'd be glad to. I mean, technically, the budget is a policy. Technically, the budget is a policy. We operate under it. You approve it as a sort of a system and a set of numbers, but there's some sort of off-season discussions that we should have about things like bond restructuring and long-term vehicle replacement plans, you know, things that take a little initiative and you know, a little leap of faith and some bravery to, you know, raise a little bit more cash ahead of expenditures to save yourself huge chunks of money. You know, if you got a vehicle that lasts 7 years, as soon as you buy the new one, you should, you know, you should be paying cash for that new one and paying 1/7 of the cost of that vehicle until you have the money in the bank to buy it again. You know, so there are some policy decisions and some long-range forecasting things that we can talk about off-season that you ought to consider. You know, right now, you know, we're looking at fundamental sort of, you know, the tree trunk. We're not out to the branches yet, but we're going to get there.
Okay. Well, we will revisit this question, I guess, as we go, as we get a feel for, you know, as Heather delivers these reports, I'm sure we'll have questions and inputs. So there we go. I have nothing else except to say that we're meeting again in 2 weeks. Rebecca, I believe the next meeting is the
27th.
Yes, the 27th, and it's the DPW and wastewater. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So that'll be an entertaining meeting for sure. You know, what's more fun to talk about than wastewater and public works? So hope to
Police and
see you
fire.
all. What's that?
I said police
Oh,
and fire.
wait. So Fred, you mean next meeting, Kurt Felix is coming to talk about wastewater?
If Kurt is representing that group, yes, then Kurt would be coming, yeah.
Can you ask him to bring a breakdown of the $500,000 that they've already spent on getting us ready? The whole thing with the our plan certification? Like, where are they on it? And
Sure,
okay, thanks.
you're welcome. If anyone has anything else, this is the time to raise your hand. Otherwise,
I
would
have
be
a
happy-
question.
Yeah,
We
Yeah, Bob.
online at the dump yet?
I'm
We
sorry,
still-
what?
Are we online at the dump? Electricity wise?
I don't think so. I haven't heard.
No,
anything.
there's, Maria may have something to say on that. I know that they're still working it, but basically land court, I think, has just not been responding.
That's right. So we're still waiting for, but as far as I know, we haven't received,
9 square feet, okay?
as far as I know, we're still waiting for land court to respond to, you know, their request for information from us, because there was some, you know, anomaly about the way the transfer of the property was done back to the town back in the 50s, where things were written in the margins and not in the body of the document. And, you know, it's just a little fuss that's going on. So, to my knowledge, we haven't heard back from the judge yet on that.
The
So-
good news is that the sun is out so rarely that the town isn't losing much money.
We might have done okay today, so.
Maybe.
Thank you for your time, everyone.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn the
So
meeting.
moved.
Second,
Anybody opposed? Well, thank you for your time. See you in 2 weeks. And I'll ask that question for you, Stephen. Thank you.
aye.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, thank you.